that's Butterworthy.
Hello everyone, welcome to Butterworthy. I am your humble host as always, Jamie Butterworth. Now this is something that I've been bursting to talk about as much as possible lately. See, I've been on a bit of a nostalgia trip over the past week or so, thanks to an appearance and a talk I did on Jay's Game Cafe. Of course, we're talking about Jay Fleming, one of the fellow members of the Gamers at Large podcast. But we talked about our favorite systems. Now, I kind of gushed at length about my favorite, and now we're going to kind of bring it to you guys to kind of extol the virtues of my favorite system and also kind of hear what you guys think. If you've ever played it yourself, if you know any of the games that I'm even talking about. I'm going to include a bit of footage here from other videos on YouTube. I'll, of course, give credit to every single YouTuber that I took video from. And all the music you're going to hear during this video is remixed music from some of my favorite Sega Saturn games. Yes, the Sega Saturn. That is my favorite video game system of all time. Now, why the Sega Saturn, you ask? Well, I'm a little bit of a gaming hipster. I tend to like things that maybe not everyone else necessarily enjoys, because when you talk to people about the 32-bit era, they talk about either the PlayStation or the Nintendo 64. That wasn't the first system I had. I had the Sega Saturn. It was my Christmas present from 1995. I was 14 years old at the time, and I was more excited about that than anything else because I honestly thought that there was no way in hell that my dad could afford to get that for me. But sure enough, Christmas morning came and I had a Sega Saturn, and I couldn't have been happier. I actually didn't get a PlayStation till 97, I believe, maybe 98. And I got that mostly to play Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, and I didn't get it in 64 until I think 99. And that was for Smash Brothers and Ocarina of Time, and Mario 64, of course. But the Sega Saturn was my, I had a love affair with that system for a number of years. Everything from playing baseball games with my father and Virtua Fighter 2, which I dearly loved. My dad even walked to Circuit City in a foot and a half of snow because they were the only place open to actually get us a copy of Virtua Fighter 2 for us to play, which we did because he worked in construction and couldn't work for 3 days solid, and I couldn't go to school for that time, so we played Virtua Fighter 2 non-stop for 3 days. I'm not even kidding you. But I mean, the Sega Saturn, the system itself was a bit unique. It had that cartridge slot in the back, which was designed, at least here, it was only for memory expansion. And to this day, the 8 meg memory card, if you get the official Sega branded one, still runs you between $30 and $50 on eBay. You can get the off-brand like Memory Card Plus, or the, I can't remember the other company that put it out, but there was an 8 gig card that you can still get for like $15, but it's not exactly the most reliable thing. The Saturn system itself has a built-in battery backup, but the problem is when you change the battery, or the battery dies, it wipes all of your data. So I would recommend a memory card if you do decide to pick up a system. But of course, the Saturn system itself still runs you about $50. It's not a system for the casual gamer. It's definitely a collector system or someone that has an avid love of these 32-bit era games. And keep in mind, all the games I'm going to be talking to you about today run $80 plus, and many are $150 plus. Or in this case of my favorite one, which I'm going to talk about, runs upwards of $350. And these are all recent sales on eBay. I'm not even kidding when I'm telling you that the Saturn is a good system for a reason. So let's talk about that today. Now, to go over some of my favorite games, you can find some of these pretty cheap, actually. Like, if you like the arcade-style AM2 games, we're talking Daytona USA and Virtua Fighter 2 and Virtua Cop, those games can be had pretty damn cheap because they were basically giving them away trying to sell the Saturn back in the mid-90s. Because, I mean, here in America, it wasn't doing so well. But, I mean, in Japan, it really went toe-to-toe with the PlayStation for a long time. Because, I mean, in Japan, they got some of the best games on both systems. Like, for example, the Sega Saturn actually had a better version of Symphony of the Night than PlayStation did. There was more to it, some of the music was remixed, there was just a lot more content there than what the PlayStation had. Some of the graphics aren't quite as well, but some things did work a bit better in the system. Because that's one thing the Saturn had the PlayStation didn't. The Saturn was built from the ground up as a 2D machine, and only when Sony announced the PlayStation and its 3D capability did Sega go in and kind of retool it for 3D. So, I mean, it had issues when it came to 3D processing, and that's why a lot of third parties had a tough time with the 3D capabilities of the system. But as far as 2D was concerned, it was unrivaled. And you would notice this in things like import versions of fighting games like Street Fighter vs. Xmen. And I believe they also released Marvel vs. Capcom on the system. They released Street Fighter Alpha 3. But basically, I'm going to compare Street Fighter vs. Xmen in particular, because that did release on the PlayStation, but it didn't have the swap-out mechanic. For a simple reason, that's because the PlayStation couldn't do it, couldn't run it. It could do the swap mechanic if you were playing two players and both players picked the exact same characters. That was the only way. But the PlayStation just didn't have the capabilities to do the automatic switching, and that's something the Sega Saturn could do. I believe it took a bit of a memory expansion. It was a 2 meg or 4 meg card, because I know they released both, and I think they even had a 1 meg card in Japan also, but I mean, that's irrelevant because it never came here. So with these expansion cards, it was able to run things like Arcade Perfect Metal Slug, Arcade Perfect Street Fighter vs. Xmen, and so many different Arcade Perfect games that were 2D based that came to the home consoles in Japan, but we never got them here. I mean, there were so many great games like Radiant Silvergun that we never got. And the funny thing is, Radiant Silvergun, as much as sought after as that game is, it's not particularly rare. So I mean, you can get Radiant Silvergun for upwards of $100 or $120, which compared to some of the other Saturn games, really is not that bad. Now, on the American side of things, some of my favorite games, my favorite game in particular that I want to talk about is Panzer Dragoon Saga. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the best role-playing games that has ever been created. Now, released on the Sega Saturn, it was 4 discs. They had their own, because at that point, Panzer Dragoon had 2 main games, and of course this was the role-playing game. The entire universe had its own lore, it had its own language, which was kind of a mixture of Japanese, and I think it was a mixture of German, if I'm not mistaken. But it had its own language. And the way this game was done, with the innovative combat mechanics that still haven't been copied to this day, with the way you would level up and morph the dragon during combat, the way it mattered, where you maneuver your dragon during fights, and it would kind of give you a heads up as to what attacks are going to be done where, and where it was safe to be, and where it wasn't safe, and the way everything changed up on the fly. I mean, it was a very interesting and engaging combat mechanic. And sadly, we haven't seen that today. We haven't seen that game ported to anything else. We haven't seen it available on PlayStation or Xbox or anywhere else. And that's a game that sadly has been left to die by history. And it's a game that I feel a hell of a lot more people need to play. Kind of going off of that, another game that I want to reference is Shining Force 3 on the Sega Saturn. Now, Shining Force 3, you can have one on eBay for upwards of $140, $150. They only released the first chapter here. In Japan, they got chapters 1, 2, 3, and then you got a bonus disc. Now, the bonus disc, I believe it's called the premium disc. It was a mail-in for a magazine, I believe. A friend of mine actually had it. But it had a little bit of an epilogue, and it had a number of battles from Shining Force 1 and 2 from the Genesis that were redone in the third one, and you could play the Shining Force 3 characters in that battle, too. So it was very interesting, added a bit of content to it, and I believe it was free. But of course now, you're looking at multiple hundreds of dollars to get that on eBay. So again, that's not cheap. But we only got the first chapter here in the US. So the sad thing is, once you finish that first chapter, you were done. You were left at a cliffhanger that was never resolved here. Not in English, at least. You could import Shining Force 3 Episode 2 and 3. And your character names would be in English if you imported your data over, because you could do that. But sadly, the entire story just wasn't Japanese, so you had no idea what was going on. You had to kind of piece it together. I'm sure you can find fan translations online, but unfortunately the games never came here. Other games, another fantastic game that actually did see a port to the Xbox 360, and you can get this game. They actually have it so you can toggle in HD or the classic graphics, is Guardian Heroes. That's another one of my favorites. I put so many hours into, because it just has this unique, branching, side-scrolling jump between 3 different levels and level up during the whole thing. It's a great side-scrolling beat-em-up that kind of precedes games like Castle Crashers that are in the same vein. And that's another one with a unique characters, unique and odd story, and the multiplayer arena mode was a lot of really interesting battles, because you could pretty much put anything in that arena mode, and any of the characters in the game. Everything from the peasants that would run around and just, you know, flee in terror, to the main gods that you would fight in the game. And that was always fun to just sit and watch, especially when you get to watch a level 99 hamster beat the shit out of a level 10 god. That was always entertaining. But Guardian Heroes is a game that at least you can get on another current system. And then, of course, there's another game, which is an old favorite of mine, which is Virtua. They did a sequel of that for the Dreamcast. I don't know if the original Virtua came to any other systems. I think it may have seen a port on Xbox, or that may have just been the Dreamcast version that came out. But along that same vein was another game, which was Nights into Dreams. They also released a Christmas Nights disc. That was through Blockbuster that released, because I remember I had that. I bought it from Blockbuster way back in the day. That was a game that Sega had released their own version of the analog controller for, in order to play it. And the funny thing is, if you look at the Sega Saturn analog controller and you compare it to the original Xbox Fat controller when the first Xbox released, they're very similar. And the funny thing is, the Microsoft button color scheme they have, or that they've had since the first Xbox, actually emulates the Dreamcast button color scheme, and even the XY AB layout also. Of course, that makes sense considering that, you know, the Sega head honcho dropped off the Dreamcast and went to the Xbox. But that's another discussion for another day. But back on the Saturn, it has a lot of other great RPGs. If you're an RPG fan, you need to emulate the system. Okay, this is one of the few times I'm ever going to recommend emulation to you, because the Sega Saturn is a system that so few people actually played that more people need to experience. And the thing is, all these fantastic games you can't buy on current systems. You just can't. You know, if they would drop out these Sega Saturn games onto, you know, Xbox and PlayStation and the Wii U at $10-15 a pop, they could make a hell of a lot of money, and a hell of a lot more people could actually experience these games. Because the one I reference in particular is my favorite, Panzer Dragoon Saga. I mean, that game is $350. You know, and that's copy, because it only had a run of 5,000 units back in 1997. I remember this because I got a copy for my 16th birthday. They had one copy at Toys R Us, and I begged my mom to take me to get it. And sure enough, I got it for my 16th birthday, and I played the hell out of that game, you know, many times over. But I mean, you know, there are so many games. You know, aside from the few I mentioned, Dragon Force is another one that really stands out as just being so unique. Another game that we haven't seen anything like, and they released a second one on the Japanese Sega Saturn. But I mean, that's another game that the PlayStation would have had no hope in running, just because the number of sprites they had on screen at all times. I mean, the battles were just chaos, because you had, you know, two main generals, your general and then the opponent's general, and you just had upwards of 200 units in the middle just duking it out. Everything from monks to dragons to soldiers, archers, you name it, and it was just some random unit. And you were basically battling a total of 8 different kingdoms battling out for the fate of this country. And it was such a unique game, interesting story, and just volleying and fighting for territory to try and save this kingdom. It was fantastic. It was a great game. I cannot recommend it enough. And really, anything about working designs that was on that system was fantastic. You know, everything from Magic Knight Rare to Iron Storm. That was one of my favorites. It really got me interested in World War II. And that was a turn-based strategy game that's actually surprisingly affordable. You can get it for around $40 or $50, a complete copy. That's not bad. Sega Saturn also had, you know, if you're a fan of Bomberman, you need to play Saturn Bomberman. It's the most unique and most fun Bomberman that they ever released, because it supported up to 10 players. So if you had 2 multi-taps and 10 controllers, you could play 10 players on this game. And it had these massive wide open fields. It had Bomberman pets in there. It had all these different items that just have not been done in Bomberman since. And I was surprised the other day when I went looking, but Saturn Bomberman is $150 on eBay. I mean, if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what is. They actually released a unique Bomberman on the Japanese Saturn, which is called Saturn Bomberman Fight. And that was kind of a 3D Bomberman that had 3D levels that you could go up and down these kind of pyramid pillars sort of thing. So it was basically taking a Bomberman stage and just grabbing the middle and just pulling it directly up. So the bombs explode in 3D space. It was actually a lot of fun. I had that one for a while. But, you know, other great games on the system were, like, Albert Odyssey was a game that in Japan was just kind of, you know, a mediocre RPG, but when they decided to port it to the West, Working Designs had a field day with it. So they just let their translation team have a ball, and they turned it into one of the most raucous and funny RPGs I think I've ever played before. It's hilarious. They did the translation, and they took a mediocre RPGs and turned it into something great. Albert Odyssey is definitely one to check out. And of course they had House of the Dead, the original House of the Dead, on the Sega Saturn. I think they've ported that to something else since, but the original version is again upwards of $150 on eBay. And I mean, you know, these are prices that I've quoted that people have sold recently. These aren't just, you know, people put them up for this price and they just kind of died out. Nope. People have bought these games at these prices recently. But I mean, the Sega Saturn is such a fantastic system. It's a system that has so many hidden gems that people really need to play. It's such a great system. I mean, go out and emulate it. I mean, you can emulate it on the PSP and the PS Vita and, of course, on PC. But play it. You're doing yourself... If you're someone who considers yourself a serious gamer, you need to play the Sega Saturn, because it had so many fantastic games for it. You know, after listening to this, if your interest is piqued, especially after seeing all the videos I put up for you, if you're interested in the system, you know, drop your, you know, put your interest in the comments below, and I'll be glad to give you some more suggestions. You know, if you're interested in actually buying a system, looking into collecting for it, I can give you some great resources. I can give you some good games to get started with that don't cost a lot. You know, things like Blazing Years, which was originally called Shadows of Mystara. Something like, what was the other one? There was a spiritual sequel to Beyond Oasis that they did on the system. They actually did another Beyond Oasis game on there too, but I can't remember the name of it right offhand. But it was a 3D game, similar playstyle to Beyond Oasis, and it had something like 6, 7, 8 different endings. I played that one a lot too. But there are numerous games that can be had for between $20 and $30 on the system that are, again, great hidden gems. But I believe the Sega Saturn is one of those systems that just didn't get its due. And still to this day, a lot of people don't realize just how good it was. But you guys know I'm a Sega fan, so I'm going to extol the virtues of this system and tell you how great it is, because it really is a fantastic system. But, again, check it out. Let me know what you think. Drop your opinions in the comments. And as always, if you like what I talk about, like, subscribe, and I appreciate you guys each and every time you watch my videos. But again, Jamie Butterworth signing off, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.